video on making some peanut biscotti. So I'm sure they're biscotti because I'm sure biscotti means twice baked. So we're going to bake these twice. So therefore they're biscotti. That makes sense, doesn't it? So, whole blanched peanuts were cheap in the Asian supermarket. Well, cheap. Well, as cheap as they're ever going to get. And I kind of thought, we roasted them in the past and they were very nice. And I kind of thought, well, we'll buy a couple of bags and then we'll think of something. There'll be something we can do with them. We'll make some biscuits or we'll make some peanut flour or something along those lines. So, I've taken a bag and I've roasted them. So I'm not going to open that bag, but as you can see, I've roasted them. So you roast them in the oven at 150 for about half an hour, 40 minutes. Give them a shake every 10 minutes or so, just so they get an even distribution of colour. And then that's roasted peanuts is that, and then, so no salt or anything like that, but I was kind of thinking that maybe actually buying salted peanuts, shaking off the excess salt and then grinding those peanuts into flour would probably make a really nice biscuit as well, because you've got that, because people like salted caramel biscuits, so maybe kind of like salted peanuts would kind of work in the same way. So, done that, roasted them, and then some of them, I've ground them down into a flour. Now, that's not a particularly fine flour, so it's almost kind of wanting to start to turn into peanut butter, and I think that's because I've roasted them. I think if we'd left them unroasted, they would have turned into a fine flour, but they've turned a little bit clumpy like that, which means they're going to, if I carried on processing them in the food processor, is it called the food processor? That attachment, is it the food processor? Yes, food processor. I always get mixed up with liquidizers and beaters and all that kind of stuff. So if I carried on doing that in the food processor, it would have turned into peanut butter, which is very nice, but I didn't kind of want that. My original idea was I was going to make a fine peanut flour, and then we're going to make the biscuits with that and some normal self-raising flour, and then I was going to fold in some broken up bits of peanut. Now, because we've got those bits of peanut in there that are not so fine, that start to clump together. I kind of thought, well, we don't need to add any nibbed peanuts in there, we can just leave that as is. So, what is this recipe? Oh, it was 8 eggs, which I can't remember the weight of it. I'll do the weight in the description. I'll do the weight in the description, so that's okay. But it was 8 eggs, and then we've done 450 grams worth of sugar and 450 grams worth of self-raising flour and 450 grams worth of peanuts, which would have been the peanut flour. So I've whisked the eggs so they're soft peak, and I've whisked them up with the sugar. So that's the eggs at soft peak. Now where's the flour? So this is self-raising flour that's already got the raisin agent in it. So we'll just put that flour in first and give that a bit of a mix. I think if I was to add the peanut flour now, we wouldn't get this flour incorporated into the mix just as well. We're on the danger of losing some air because it's a fatless sponge that I've made. I think because we're adding the peanuts, we can get away with a fatless sponge because there's going to be fats that come out of the peanuts, so we'll get the fatty richness from the peanuts. And then we're going to bake it like a sponge, and then we're going to cut it up into sponge fingers, and then we will, I think that'll be okay, right? And then we'll dry them out in the oven. We'll bake them again, hence the biscotti. So that end down like that. Ooh, I think this will be nice. Might be a little bit dense, but I'm not bothered about that. And because we're using self-raising flour, that should help it rise. So we're going to knock some of the air out of it by mixing, but because we've got the self-raising flour, it might rise. Now, all the peanuts might sink to the bottom of the sponge mixture, but I'm going to do that chefy trick where they tell you a little bit of a fib and how it's supposed to be like that. So when they first started burning leeks, and they kind of said, oh, they're supposed to be like that, it's supposed to give you that kind of, that bitter kind of flavour and all that kind of stuff, I was a little bit sceptical. I just kind of thought that's the typical chef trick of lying to you, like when they get some really cheap ingredients and sell them at full price. There was the pig strata in the 1980s, which the guy who, well, it wasn't the guy who started it, but the guy who became particularly famous for it, you could buy them for, or you used to get them for nothing, and then turn them into a Michelin-starred dish, which is what chefs have been doing for ages. So it's a little bit of a trick. Even though it was delicious, it's a little bit of a chefy trick. I see them on telly talking about things, and I think, oh, you're just spinning lies to get away with selling something that you ordinarily wouldn't get away with selling. But that's the same as when you write a menu and you flour things up. This served with that, with a creme of this and a foam of that and a sprinkling of that and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so wash my hands. Oh, I suppose I really should taste the mixture, shouldn't I? So a little bit left in there on the spatula. That's rather nice. So in the oven, 30-40 minutes. We'll see how it turns out. This smells ready. Looks alright. Certainly cooked. Probably a little bit overcooked if we're doing a fatless sponge. It's kind of quite hard on top. But we're going to dry it out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And we don't want it to sag anyway, so that'll stop it from sagging. Well, help it from stop it from sagging. It won't stop it. If it's going to sag, it's going to sag. So, cool that. Cut it into 3, and then sponge fingers. We'll dry it out. Well, we'll taste it just as a sponge, and then we'll dry it out, and then we'll taste it as biscotti. But I think that'll be really nice. Oh yes. So, you can use whole eggs for this. I used whole eggs, but you can use just egg whites, and that's why in the recipe it's for the weight of eggs rather than how many eggs to can use. I've just eaten a peanut and I've got peanut in the back of my throat. So it works kind of either way. Egg whites, it won't be as rich, but a fatless sponge like this is a good way of using up egg whites. And oh yeah, because biscottis are made with egg whites, aren't they? Yeah, biscotti biscuits. No, not biscotti. Amaretto biscuits are made with egg whites. They're not made with whole eggs. So that's probably why. I wonder if that's where I got the idea from. I wonder if that's where I got the idea from. I used to do a lot of functions, and they always wanted creme brulee. So I always ended up with lots of egg whites. I don't like throwing food away, so I'd think of things to do with it. And I kind of think, well, we've got all these egg whites. What am I going to do with it? So you kind of go, well, we'll see if we can make a sponge, a fatless sponge with just egg whites rather than whole eggs, and then we can turn the fatless sponge into sponge fingers, and then we can do other things with the sponge fingers. We can do tiramisus, we can do trifles, we can do anything like that. So that was kind of like the idea, but I wonder if I got the original idea from amaretto biscuits. But it's the first time I made them only a couple of weeks ago, so I must have read or thought about it. There's no new ideas. Well, very few new ideas. But I will have got the idea from somewhere. Maybe I got it from there. But anyway, I must have seen someone make them. I must have seen someone like Nigella or Jamie make amaretto biscuits, or Mary Berry. Someone make some amaretto biscuits sometime and seen that they just used egg whites, and that's kind of what got me kind of thinking. But anyway, I'm waffling. Well, it should have just been a short video, shouldn't it? Let's have a cut into this, if I can find my knife. So it's not sunk at all. We haven't burnt it. So, into 3. Like that. That's probably just not quite even, but Doesn't matter. Oh, that's okay, doesn't it? That's a nice effect. So we don't want an end bit, but we do want the next bit. And give it a taste. That's lovely, is that? I think that'll be even nicer when we've dried it out into spongy fingers, biscotti type of thing. So, more slices, that, all the way down. Do the same with the other. Onto a tray. Baking parchment, or baking parchment is better than grease with baking parchment, and then just in the low oven for 100 degrees, something like that, just until they become crisp. The undersides will have a habit of, so that part will dry out first, but the underside, because it's on something, won't. So you need to potentially flip them over halfway through, unless you're going to dry them on a wire rack, actually on the shelves in the oven, but that's a little bit more difficult than just putting them on a tray with a bit of grease and baking parchment. So we'll dry those out, and then we'll give them a taste when they're dry, and I think they'll be even nicer. Right, so they have dried out. Let's just break one open. Nice crumbly texture. They're lovely. They're lovely, love. So peanuts are actually peanuts. They're actually a legume. So, I think. So that's about as cheap as you're going to get a nut. Let's just call them a nut. So they're about as cheap as you can get for as nuts go. And really nice, actually. Now, I was having a bit of a think. And I roasted them and then ground them up. I wonder if they turn into more of a flour if we don't roast them. So if we, before we roast them, if we grind them into a flour, then I wonder if they turn more into a flour rather than they're a bit they weren't, well, like chips, weren't they, rather than like peanut butter. They were like peanut chips rather than actual peanut flour, but worked out well, and you get the flavour of the roast peanuts coming through it. But I wonder if we can take some of the blanched peanuts and turn them into a flour before we roast them. No, that didn't make sense. Now I wonder if we can turn them into a flour when they're just blanched peanuts. Then potentially we could then roast that flour. That might be kind of quite interesting. So that might be something I do when I've eaten all these biscuits. Might be a while, but very nice and cheap and worth doing. To be honest, worth doing. They're lovely. A success.